Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the 2023 York City budget hearings back to order. And it is 6 o'clock on November 22nd, 2022. So first, again, I will read, just for everyone's benefit, the introduction. Thank you all for attending tonight's budget hearing. It is important to recognize that we are here tonight to focus on our financial priorities with regard to finalizing the 2023 York City budget. We know that government needs to do more with less, and we are. As our budget is basically the blueprint for the City of York, it is imperative that the budget team and I receive as much information as possible in order to ensure a fiscally responsible budget is adopted. With that said, we will hear testimony on projected income and budgeted expenses for all departments as they relate to programs and services for the City of York, appropriations, how they will be used, projected expenditures, and program outcomes. In considering the budget, Council may reduce any item and may increase or add items as deemed appropriate and or necessary to achieve the City's goals and its financial objectives. I'd like to emphasize that this is a public hearing, not a public meeting. Although we welcome your comments, a public hearing is not a debate session, but is designed specifically for the purpose of receiving testimony and evidence on the issue at hand. Presenters will first be given an opportunity to outline their budget, followed by the budget team. We will then receive public testimony. It is asked that each person providing testimony give your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes so that everyone who wishes to speak has an opportunity to do so. Are rebuttal comments allowed? At my discretion, rebuttal comments may be allowed. If allowed, rebuttal comments will only address specific matters or questions raised during the hearing and must be brief, preferably 3 minutes or less. Things to keep in mind: speakers should provide testimony pertinent to the subject matter at hand and should avoid repetition of comments made by previous speakers. Refraining from comment if the same points were raised by a prior speaker or simply stating agreement with the points previously provided will help move the hearing along so that others who wish to speak will have the opportunity to do so. Large groups whose members wish to speak are encouraged to designate a spokesperson. What about written testimony? Exhibits, letters, petitions, and other documents presented or shown will become part of the official record. Written testimony may be submitted in conjunction with or in place of oral testimony. What is not allowed? No disruptions or disorderly conduct will be tolerated. Speakers and members of the public shall refrain from abusive or profane remarks, disruptive outbursts, applause, protests, engaging in disruptive conversation during presentations, speaking out of turn, preventing or attempting to prevent others who have the floor from speaking, or other conduct which disrupts or interferes with the orderly conduct of the public hearing is strictly prohibited. Personal attacks on elected officials, staff, or members of the public are out of order and will not be tolerated. It is not appropriate for a speaker to debate a matter under consideration with other speakers, the audience, or members of the budget panel. Engaging in such conduct and failing to cease upon request will be grounds for ending a speaker's time. With your cooperation, we will have an informative and successful hearing, and your adherence to these instructions is truly appreciated. Consideration for adoption of the 2023 budget is projected to take place before December 31st, 2022, and will be advertised accordingly. With that, we will resume with the York City Fire Department. Chief Sleeger.
Good evening, Mayor and everyone. The budget proposal that I submitted this year kind of stayed along the lines, but we did have to make some increases. The cost of doing business, for example, vehicle fuels, more than doubled, which was an unanticipated expense from last year. So those were with that, and more staff that we need to for retirements will be our biggest increase in the budget for 2023.
I guess the first item I have is just the salary line. That's an increase of 8%. That's not the percentage growth for the fire department. So are there additional hirings going on, or what's happening there?
No more than what's been budgeted, but you have the 3% that was agreed upon in the CBA as the cost of living adjustment, but there's also longevity involved. So you can't look at it straight 3%. That also then the longevity gets compounded on top of that. And then you're also looking at the 2.8% NAF increase for the two chiefs' salary.
So the actual increase due to contractual obligations with salaries is about $150,000, so $270,000 then is for longevity?
I can give you a breakdown. They do have vacancies in the department at the moment, but it still just gets them up to the complement that they've been carrying for the last 2-3 years. So I can double check the amounts, but.
Then I see a large reduction in interfund transfer. Is that because we were paying for the two new engines?
Interfund transfer.
43,150.
Yes, that's the transfer into Fund 50 was decreased, so that wasn't needed any longer.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, that's the expense out of the general fund into the capital projects fund. So what is budgeted for the capital projects is $390,000 this year, as opposed to $627,571 the previous year, which, because that did include. Let's see, that included, trying to make sure I'm at the capital projects. We had, let's see what's in here when it's totaling out at the bottom. Capital projects. Expenses. Yes, there was. There's less of a transfer. I'll take a look at it.
Okay, just.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious about that, and then hopefully some of the 290 is going towards the capital needs that we discussed, or where is that in here?
There is, the very last page is what's in capital projects right after the ARPA. So we have $297,571 coming over as a transfer from the general fund. There is $333,571 towards vehicle lease purchases. Then there is
Yeah, I'm just looking at the transfer.
yeah, and then
The interfund transfer and the transfer from general fund are the same, right? 43,150 is the same thing as 39,090. That's the,
yes.
is that accurate?
The $297,571, that's the expense in general fund, is the transfer as revenue coming into the capital projects fund.
Right, and then the capital projects fund is our long-term fund to be able to address the ladder truck.
But it's also included in there is the Rex Laurel Fire Station renovations is included in there. There's $390,000 that's in there. That is all but $5,000 of what was budgeted last year using proceeds from the sale of the plant, which is part of the essentially the architectural engineering and consulting needs as we prep for the RACP. And then additionally, there is still the $750,000 that council assigned from ARPA funds to go towards the Rex Laurel. So it's a combination of specifically from the general fund, and then also you'll see that they do have $36,000 that essentially is their fire recovery fees that doesn't even go into the general fund. It goes directly into the capital fund every year in order to support, yes, future duty officer vehicles.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we were continuing to put money away for the ladder truck.
Yeah, because Chief, the 333,571, are those for specific vehicles? Do you recall? I can look what's in here.
That's what we're trying to keep for the ladder truck.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I was looking for.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then again, the fire recovery fees are for the duty vehicles. But that's where we're at with that.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
No, I'm good.
Anybody else? Budget team? Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yep. And again, thank you all for your assistance with this. Thank you.
And Kim, Acting Business Administrator, you are up. Are you going to talk to us from here?
Yeah, if everyone doesn't mind. We're going back to page 10 of the document. Sorry, making my notes for fire. Double check salaries. Okay, so business administration. I think those of us who were here or tuned in to the first part of the budget hearing last night had heard the mayor's statement and shared all the good things that business administration has been able to do in the last year and that we're continuing to work towards. As a quick rundown for those who may not know, the Department of Business Administration includes business administration proper. Similar to how Public Works has Public Work Admin, there's Business Administration Admin. Then we also have the Office of Human Resources and the Risk Management budget fall under Business Administration. Also snuck into Business Administration proper is the budget for the White Rose Community Television. And then we also have the Finance Bureau is in here, the Parking Bureau, the Office of Information Technology is also in here. So we got a couple to go over. And if we're ready, we can start with business administration proper. Business administration proper is split between a little bit of general fund and a little bit of internal services fund, which does get allocated and shows up as allocation in the other budgets as the business admin allocation. So first off, you see general fund, the salaries paid out of 10 and 70 represent the business administrator and the assistant business administrator's salaries. There is a small portion of the what currently is the administrative assistant who is stationed out of HR and is usually included in the HR budget. She, that position, is paid with 50% of that salary is via Fund 70 and 200, which is business administration. 28% of it is paid through Fund 70 in HR, and then 22% is paid through Fund 10 with parking, because they do assist with the ordering supplies and the requisition and PO process, and so they assist there as well. And since parking has a revenue stream, we take advantage of that to help fund that overall position. So that's what's included. There's really, besides salary and the bond issuance for the business administrator that's required, there's not much additional or any kind of increases in the expenses. We do have under special projects is that we have been funding the last several years and hope to move much further with it this year. The Article 136 review and diversity study, which has also flowed into the development of a procurement policy for the city. So we have rolled that money back in so that we have funding to help pay for the professionals that we are utilizing to assist with that process. So that's in there. Then we have, we do have ARPA for business administration, and it's $220,000 for other professional services, and that represents We have a contract with a separate auditing firm to that we can inquire with if we have questions about financially how to handle any of ARPA concerns, and then this is also the money that's going to be used for the agreement that we're hopefully very close to having in place for an ARPA essentially grant administrator, which is what was requested by council, and we did an RFQ process for, and we are at the final stages of getting a contract in place.
Very good. I only have one question, and that is the the ARPA Habitat for Humanity Chestnut Street money, $161,000. That was to complete the last phase, not the last phase, but the most recently completed phase of the Chestnut Street project. I was just, and it's just a matter of where it's being placed in the budget. I was surprised to find it under Business Administration and not under Economic and Community Development.
Yeah, that's where it ended up being put in for FY22, but that has been paid out and is no longer an expense.
Oh, yeah, of course, it's last year's.
Yeah. So that's basic business administration proper. Past that, we move into Fund 66, which is the separate fund associated with the White Rose Community Television. And Mr. Cliff Kern, who is the man behind the curtain in the back, who's making sure that this hearing and the other meetings associated with the York County and with the City of York Council and other associated meetings are televised via the channels on Comcast 16 and 18, and then also various other videoing endeavors that people reach out to the station to help handle. So there's other events like tennis tournaments and the football games that Cliff, I'd say Cliff and his team, but it's really just Cliff, assist in and actually get some revenue in, which is listed in here as sponsorships periodically throughout the year, as well as having the community television station available, as you had mentioned in your statement, to the public for those that want to utilize it as a form of communication to the community. So for his budget in general, we do receive cable TV franchise licenses, an agreement with Comcast, and the money that he receives from York County for the County of York for their board meetings, commissioner meetings, sorry. So his whole fund or office actually ends up coming up with a surplus every year, and he still does this year.
You have no questions?
Okay.
Other than thanking, there are volunteers. I want to thank, there are some volunteers that do help Cliff from time to time, and also all of our volunteer producers and content providers that help us keep White Rose Television providing entertaining and educating information to the community.
Lastly, for business administration is the Fund 70 internal services portion of business administration, again, which is the portion, the remaining portion of the business administrator and the assistant business administrator's salary, that portion of the current administrative assistant's salary, and then the rest of the bond issuance. It is split between general fund and 70, and really just some additional minimal expenses are requested for association and dues and the occasional conference that we're able to attend. One thing of note that is a reduction in here was there was an item last year called special items. That was 43160, and it was $210,358 last year, and that represented the interest that it was calculated that would have been owed for the O&E pension fund for the 2020 and the 2021 payments that were still due. So we paid them in October, so there's no need, and we are working to pay the 2022 and anticipate that being paid before the end of November, so there's no need to add interest for next year. And again, that interest was paid directly to the pension fund. So it's kind of like paying ourselves, though we, you try to not be in the position of not paying your MMO, the minimum municipal obligation. Sometimes that's used with the idea that the interest that is paid to the pension fund to help go towards obligations for that fund. So it's kind of to a benefit to a point, but we will not have to do that this year. Cash flow is not an issue, so it will be paid. So that would wrap up business administration, account 200. All right, so we'll move on to human resources. Human resources is completely Fund 70 internal services, and it does have its own allocation. So, all the costs associated with the Office of Human Resources budget is then allocated out to the other departments within the city. The big change in this budget, besides just the allocations that also come in here from the other fringe benefits and such, there's two. First of all, there is an increase in salaries with the reclassification of, as I mentioned, the administrative assistant to an actual executive administrator. For the purpose of the role and additional responsibilities and how she can be better utilized by the business administrator, but also being able to help all of the offices and bureaus in business administration who do not have their own individual administrative help. Along with that is we have two HR generalists that have been working for the city for over 5 years, and they handle pretty much everything else associated with human resources except for employee and union relations, which would be left up to the Deputy Business Administrator of Human Resources, along with obviously the management and oversight of broad level projects. So there is a proposed increase in their salaries because they have been running at the minimum of their pay band for over 5 years, and they have been given additional responsibilities as myself as Deputy Business Administrator for Human Resources has been holding on to a lot of responsibilities in terms of pension reporting and compensation calculations and reporting that has been delegated to the other generalists who are very capable of doing it and have the bandwidth to take over, since we've been able to utilize some automation and some software processes that have assisted in their other roles. So there is an increase included in here, which represents the jump from 92,899 to 207,644. The other increase in here is Human Resources administers the Civil Service Board for police and fire hiring and promotions. So we have the budgets. The expense budgets are in Human Resources, but there's actually a transfer from individually the police department in and then from the fire department in for those expenses. We have been running tight on those budgets the last several years, and so I have just proposed an increase to double them. We've been holding we've held two police probationary police officer examinations this year, and we anticipate we're going to have to do that again for next year. And as we've been improving the processes that are part of the testing, including utilizing an outside organization to come in to do group interviews for the oral interview process, there's expenses associated with that. And though we do collect application fees, it doesn't always completely cover the expense in order to keep the application fee low enough in order to entice people to actually apply. We want to get, to have that commitment that you're paying towards it so that people are not just applying and then not actually going to follow through. Then also to recoup a little bit of what the expense is. We do require an application fee, but the rest of the cost is absorbed through the police and fire department and general fund and Fund 10. So there is a request to increase that so we're not running into an issue of not being able to pay our interviewers and the other expenses for next year. And I think this is something that we started using policeapps.com for accepting applications and organizing the entire probationary police officer process, and we anticipate doing that with fire this year. And so I think we'll definitely be able to reevaluate the total cost of both of those processes next year, with the idea that, okay, now we've had, you know, two full years of police and a year of fire. What does it really look like in terms of all of our new processes in place and the expenses? So there's a request for a bump this year. Like I said, that ends up being in police and fire, but I'm not anticipating it staying in the long run. So that is the end specifically of the human resource budget. All right, then we get into the fund risk management budget. So risk management, for the most part, everyone knows budget-wise as the home for all of our health insurance related expenses and all of our liability insurance expenses. So this, once again, is a fund, majority of it is Fund 70 internal services, and all these expenses get allocated out to the other departments. A quick note, there is a special projects Fund 26 revenue and expense in here. We've been fortunate enough with our health insurance third-party administrator, Capital Blue Cross, that they do offer a incentive, a wellness program incentive for us to promote wellness among our employees. And we actually have a very active employee wellness committee who set up different events throughout the year and provides little goodie bags for the employees, pointing out specific health conditions and, you know, other wellness activities that they're able to essentially expense and then seek reimbursement from Capital Blue Cross. And for goodness, probably the last 10 some years that we've been with Capital Blue Cross, that was $10,000, but this year we are starting a new contract with them, and they wanted to keep us. And so one of the things that they enticed us with was to increase that incentive to $13,500. So Helen, HR generalist in our office, is very eager to get a lot of good incentive prizes and other items and bring in. She's brought in all kinds of outside kind of fun events for the employees so that they focused a lot on mental wellness this year, because we all kind of need that, on top of reminding us to, you know, eat well and have our vegetables, and to, you know, be aware of factors that might point to diabetes and heart disease and stuff. We've really been trying to. It's kind of our employee fun committee as well. So we're excited that there's an increase in that, and it officially has a home. That's one of those Fund 26 project, special project lines that has been in the background. I discussed it last night, but hasn't actually been part of the operating budget specifically, and there's no reason that it shouldn't be. So now we're going to have a home. Treasurer Jeffcoat will be happy. There's a place revenue-wise to deposit the money when they come in, and then we have a line item specifically dedicated to the expenses. Otherwise, the expenses have been associated as part of the other professional services line item, and it's been eating up that budget in HR. So that's what's new on here and why you don't see a budget for last year. Then to the internal services. The first thing you'll note is there is a revenue line item of miscellaneous of $78,000, and that represents specifically the employee payroll deductions that are taken for some of our programs, like the flex spending for medical, and they're essentially like an in and out, where we're collecting them, the supplemental life insurance that's offered to the employees, that we're collecting a premium out of their checks, but then it's part of the expense below. So it's kind of it says miscellaneous because it's, for the most part, it's miscellaneous payroll deductions that are coming in that are immediately issued out to the policyholder or to Chart Snyder, who oversees our flex spending, so that it can be credited to the individual's account. So that's explaining what that 78 is. And to note, that revenue is taken into account when the allocation is determined for the other departments. So we subtract that out from the expenses and we also subtract out the premiums that are collected from the active employees and the retirees for the health insurance coverage. We do subtract that out before we determine the net cost that's associated with allocating it across the city. So the main expenses that you see on page 14 and 15 are what is associated with, again, our health insurance and our general liability, professional liability, vehicle insurance, all of that such. So this year we have our health broker, AIA Alera group, has made great steps in offering some changes, not necessarily to our plan design, which is very rich, and we're very grateful that we're able to offer to the employees, but actually to kind of the administration of the program, where we were able to minimize the increase in the overall expenses, specifically for health paid claims and prescription. So that was a huge step. Every year, unless we minimize the benefits that are offered, as to we are self-insured for our health and prescription claims. So unless we minimize what we're willing to pay, the expenses are just going to go up with the nature of the cost of healthcare. So these steps, specifically, there was an additional provider brought in for prescriptions, where what they do is they kind of work as an advocate. And I've learned a lot about prescription drugs, and there are a classification of drugs that are special drugs that are very expensive. They're for specific conditions. A lot of times they are chronic, and so they do end up costing the city a lot of money. So this additional provider comes in, and anytime, and they work with our pharmacy provider to pinpoint any employees or retirees that have been prescribed those drugs. And they work with the employee, they kind of take it out of the plan, and they work with the employee to see if there's any other ways to pay for it. So essentially the drug is temporarily denied so that they don't have the coverage, so that then they can reach out for rebates from the pharmaceutical companies. They look to see if the employee retiree is willing, if there are international options for bringing for the prescriptions to come in, which cost less. So they're just kind of working out all the options, and it all, of course, there's lots of factors that are dependent on the employee's eligibility for these programs, but the attempt is to find another way to pay for it. And when that happens, it's zero cost to the employee as well, so they don't have to pay their co-insurance either. So it's benefit to the employee, and then it's ultimately a benefit to the city, because we end up paying less for the prescriptions. So if in the end there's no other way to pay for it, we put it right back in through the prescription program, and it's paid as usual, and the employee pays what is established as their copay. So steps like that are taken to minimize our expenses, and it is a weird proportion in terms of the just a handful of employees that have these specialty drugs end up costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So there are steps that have been taken to reduce the increase. So you'll see a minimum increase. All things considered, it's really only a $400,000 increase from last year in terms of the total health insurance cost.
So I'm assuming with that prescription plan, that is, of course, done in a responsible manner, that first I kind of felt concerns when you said that their kind of coverage is ended, but
Yeah.
I'm sure that
No, if
done in a responsible way to make sure that anything that they need.
Yep, if
they're
there's temporary approvals for a 1 month, 2 month prescription, will be approved through the plan, so that they have time to work with the employer retiree to see what options are available. So yeah, there's the only impact is making sure that the employee or the retiree is welcome to, essentially it's like a concierge service, to answer those phone calls and take the 15 minutes to talk with them. But if there's immediate need for prescription, no one is ever going to not be without their drugs just because we're trying to save everybody some money. Not at all. Which is also nice. So ultimately what happens in the background is that we pay a bit more for the administrative costs for this program, but it is the actual savings for the prescription drugs outweigh that additional administrative. The other thing that they do then too, though, is that they can kind of They're independent third party who is keeping an eye on what the employees are being and the retirees are being prescribed, and to see if there's other ways, if there's something that triggers in their system as something that should be, not a chronic, but a temporary drug, they will reach out to the providers and be like, hey, this is still prescribed. Is there something else that we could that could be tried that could ultimately save some money? And then also there's some ways they look at it too, that it's weird the way the system works is that if you're prescribed a 300 milligram pill, that costs more than 250 milligram pills. So they'll reach out, and it's going to be up to the insured to, yeah, I'm fine with that, or I'm not. If they're not, fine, it'll still get processed as normal. But they have that extra set of eyes that obviously we don't have the capacity to and wouldn't want to dive that far into, to just continue to make sure that our employees are getting the best care and that we are saving as much money as possible so that we can continue providing great coverage to everybody. So.
Yeah, I'd like to point out at this time, yesterday when I spoke, I mentioned that the revenue for the city of York grows at about 2%, and that it's health care and pensions that are really long-term liabilities for us and growing faster than our revenue rate. And here's a perfect example. And it's because we're self-insured, we can't always tell. So you're budgeting, but it's based on a graph. It's based on projections. But the projection is $500,000, so $500,000 more than it was last year. That's a 6.5% growth rate. So again, we have a 2% revenue growth rate in the city, yet, and this year actually is kind of low compared to some of them, but we have a 6.5% growth rate in the healthcare costs. And I know you didn't run over here yet, but the vehicle insurance.
Yeah.
Am I jumping too far ahead? Or
No.
Vehicle insurance up 50% in 1 year. What is going on there?
When it comes to the other insurance plans, we have a separate broker that assists us with that, Willis Towers Watson, and they do their best to try to find us the best deal for the coverage that we need. But in general, the cost of vehicle insurance has increased. And not that we have had a lot of severe vehicle accidents, but there was a stretch where we had quite a few smaller accidents that have happened that, the insurers look at our claim history, and that it threw some flags that essentially did not offer us discounts in terms of where things are currently in the expense of vehicles, so of vehicle insurance. So yeah, that is definitely something that they have come back and they said, hey, we're trying to get the best deal that we can for you, but that is what they've projected at this point that it will cost us.
And I'm seeing a similar thing here, actually a much worse thing, in the property insurance, a 71% increase in the cost of property insurance in 1 year. I guess we don't have to talk about it now, but I'd like to understand that.
Yes, and the one thing I need to double check with that is that might have still been based off of us covering the wastewater treatment plant, because they have just gotten to the point of giving us a credit for removing the wastewater treatment plant back in May. They have just processed that, and that was $110,000 towards what our overall cost for the policy will be. So I will double check that, because they just sent that to us today, to see if there is definitely a less of an increase because we have a huge property that is no longer on our books.
Very good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, please continue.
Okay, let me make note of that. Check property. Okay, so risk management. Risk management ends up with what I had mentioned earlier, is that we have individual cost centers associated with the different employee groups. in terms of the premium contributions for retiree and employee health care. So you'll see that at the end of the risk management budget. There were, for next year, increases per collective bargaining agreements with our York Public Employee Association, clerical union associated with AFSCME, and then there was a modest increase to the IFF fire contract. So those are in there. Our IBEW contract expired at the end of last year, and so they do not have a new one in place, which means we have not been able to collect higher contributions, but it also means that we haven't been obligated to cost of living adjustments either, so they kind of wash. The Teamsters contract and the FOP police contract are still in negotiations for effective dates of 1/1/2023. So I haven't included any increases because we don't know what they were going to be. So there is potential that before the year is out next year that there will be higher contributions coming in here, but can't budget for that yet.
Questions? Nope, no questions.
All righty. Finance. So finance is fun in terms of we had discussed yesterday about how just about all the revenue that was associated previously with the finance department after several years ago when they were responsible for collecting revenue coming in before it was transferred, rightfully so, to the treasurer's office, is no longer there. What is left is the proceeds from the sale of plant that is being used to balance the general fund at this point. The big hunk of that is the MMO payments for 2022, knowing that the proceeds, to use the proceeds to pay for that.
And what is that amount?
That is about $11 million.
Okay, thank you.
The expenses associated with the finance office is pretty much for personnel and some office supplies that keep themselves going. And those are all under the general fund now.
And this increase in wages is the position that we discussed with Treasurer Jeff Cote yesterday?
Correct. Actually, without that, ultimately because of staff changing and restructuring, we would probably see a not a reduction, but less of an increase. But yes, there is a request for one additional staff accountant to join the team in order to take over the responsibilities of past due sewer bills and billing for refuse, questions about what accounts are due, those such items. And then also the intent is, as we move into a procurement policy, that this individual would be able to assist Anine and the rest of the staff with overseeing that process.
And I see the other professional services is nearly cut in half. And does that reflect the movement of contracted positions in finance to employee positions?
Yes, thanks to the residency requirement being changed.
Yeah, I want to thank council. This is something we've been working on for years and years to change the residency requirements. I know at least one of the people now working for us was a contractor that we were paying probably at least twice as much as we're paying as an employee, because not only do you have to pay the individual, but you are paying the company, and of course they've got to make theirs. So by allowing us to hire directly, we have saved $130,000 there. So seeing that the salary line went up $70,000, but the other professional services went down $130,000. That looks good. I'm glad to see what we hoped would happen is happening.
Sure is. The other line in here is the unfunded pension liability. Again, represents the 20 and 21 MMO payments that were due. So the interest was in the BA, but the liability was in the 22 budget for finance. What you also see that's different for finance is finance was also the home of the individual funds associated with our debt obligations that have been either, you'd mentioned yesterday, either paid, called, the ones that were callable were paid, or money has been escrowed aside to cover them from the proceeds of the sale of the plant. So there's no need for expenses, and you're no longer seeing the real estate tax that was associated with these. It has been moved essentially to the general fund, and that's part of what's presented to council as two ordinances associated with the budget. Is the one that is the allocations of the budget, the details of the expenses. The other one is the tax rate. So the tax rate was formally split between the general fund, a little bit for recreation, and then essentially to cover a certain amount for these funds here. This year's ordinance that was presented to council, I left the line in there to represent that this is zero for the funds and increase the amount that was going towards that. I think it was 1 mil that added that to the general fund amount. So that's how we represented it. And then it's moved into the treasurer's office. So that pretty much takes a couple pages of Fund 40 through 45 of the previous debt obligations. The other thing that gets removed out of here is there used to be a lot associated with Fund 60 for sewer in terms of some expenses that were indirect costs that were billed back to the sewer for work done in the finance office. So those are no longer here and have been rolled. Those associated amounts were rolled into, and that's what you'll see, that it was $21,000 associated with sewer last year. So that was put as part of that increase that you see in Fund 10, plus the, I believe, $50,000 associated with the staff accountant. So that adds up to the 70 difference. The other thing, though, that we don't get to also include is the revenue that was associated with the payments that would be billed out to the other municipalities associated with the sewer system, which is fine because we don't have the expenses associated with it either, which would have been in the wastewater treatment plant and the sewer maintenance budgets. So there's a bunch of just showing you that there was expenses and revenue last year, but it's zeros this year. So next year, we won't even include it. It's like it never happened. So that's pretty much finance.
I have no further questions. You all worked on putting this together, right? So it's like the business administration already knows that they agree with the business administration budget. So other than me, I don't think you're going to hear too many questions.
Yeah, I'm all for pointing out anything that's weird. Next would be information technology. Let me make sure I have. Oh, no, sorry, central services. Yep, I'm jumping ahead. Okay, so central services is its own budget department under business administration. I think I forgot to mention that when I introed. This is essentially a group of expenses that are mainly associated with some specific staff with City Hall. So we have the what people refer to the receptionist that is located outside the door here. Her salary is all associated in here. We have, the one thing I did notice is that previously we had 2 custodians associated here. I think in the transition of we had a custodian leave to become a police officer, I think, which was great. In the process of replacing her in the budget, it looks like that went towards business building maintenance and not back here into central services. So there's 1 custodian budgeted in central services now instead of 2, which is something that we could definitely consider adjusting because this all gets allocated out to the other departments as well for the cost of administration here at City Hall. So the other expenses here are also, again, like postage in general. We have a postage machine downstairs that's available to all city departments to use, so that expense is universal. So kind of universal expenses. The cost of telephone, our telephone service is included in here. Our wireless is in here. There are janitorial supplies, so overall the supplies that are here, and I think anything that's not associated with like the recreation fund, that is all one universal budget that's here in central services.
Yeah, I have no questions with this budget.
Yeah.
There are no changes.
Yeah, so it's kind of a universal hub for expenses associated with overall administration is in central services. So like I said, the one thing I did notice when I was reviewing was that I ended up moving a custodian. So since we've got a couple other changes, I'll probably go ahead and do that so that we can take advantage of, we do have 2 custodians working here, one in the morning and one in the evening. So might as well take advantage of utilizing this area as opposed to building maintenance's budget.
Is it already in building maintenance's
It
budget?
is.
All right, we'll talk about that.
Okay. All right. Central services, all right, now the information technology. So IT, obviously, a portion of the budget is associated with staff in IT who keeps us running literally the entire city in terms of all of our network infrastructure. They do oversee the city's cellular plans and the distribution of phones, our telephone system. The other thing, I asked Josh to give me some highlights. He said that for the expense of other professional services, he does have a $300,000 increase in that. And that is based on an estimate that he received to install wireless connections between city buildings currently served by our Comcast ENS system. This is not a replacement for Comcast, but it's a redundant connection between buildings so that we can continue operations should Comcast go down like they did earlier this year. So that was, and that's what's great. Josh Houston, who is the Deputy Business Administrator for IT, especially we learned a lot when we had the break-in in 2020 as, you know, what our vulnerabilities are, and everything that's been, that he has come back and put into place includes multiple redundancies like this. So this is just an additional step to make sure that we're never in that position again, which I think we all will be very happy about. The other increase he said was under 44400, other contractual services. He says, he actually says he thinks it should be a little higher because he just got a new quote. He said the increase should be about $260,000, to be up to $260,000, which would be additional $18,000. This is, let's see here. This is received from our reseller. The reason we historically sign a 5-year lease for new laptops, and we're only able to receive a 4-year option now. He's still working with Microsoft to get better pricing, but now he was informed that it's about $100,000 a year, which is a $55,000 increase from our last lease. So he's working to try to get that back, but we do have an agreement that we usually have in order to have so many replacements of laptops throughout the year. So that's what he's working on for that. The other portion of the increase in other contractual services is to account for the estimated yearly cost for a new leased fiber solution to replace our current Comcast ENS connection. They estimate that it will be about $99,000 a month and would replace the $12,000 a month that they pay to Comcast that's actually in the central service budget. But they want to submit it as an RFP to make sure they get the best price for the service. So it's a little bit overestimated at this point. Lastly, he says for capital DP software maintenance, which is 46122, he says, with so many new projects and expanding services the city has been offering, we've been falling short on being able to provide hardware, software, and licensing needs for departments, like the police department taking over new buildings, permits and parking having updated needs for faster and more specialized equipment, and just replacing and repairing failing equipment as examples. So they have requested an increase here so that they can better meet the needs of everybody. So you will see, what is it, $18,000 increase about there so that they have the budget to help everybody else as they're coming up with these great ways to serve the public.
Well, and as we progress with the Sylvia Newcomb Center, we're going to see more of a need as
Right.
well.
We got to keep that in mind, you know,
That's
obviously.
probably not till next year's budget, but
Building upgrades for that is one thing, and luckily with the RACP, that'll help towards that, but we have to think bigger. I mean, even when it comes to, okay, well, now we have a new building to insure, what are all the aspects that are associated with having this great opportunity, and definitely IT is going to be one of them. So that's IT. We got one more left, if we're good with IT.
yep.
All right. So we've got parking. This was and Cottrell's in the back, so the parking bureau manager can correct me if I'm wrong. This is the first full year that we have had, we're going, 22 is the first full year that we have had the parking system under the city as opposed to the general authority. So now we're going into a year under our belt and how we're budgeting for 2023. The one thing that we were looking at here is there is, the parking budget has always been, and I've definitely seen it in terms of how we would allocate out Cottrell and the assistant parking bureau manager, Mary's salaries 5 different ways to Sunday in order to represent that we have different cost centers for different aspects of the parking system. So traditionally we had a cost center for each of the 3 garages. We had a cost center for lots, we had a cost center for meters, and we have a separate cost center for parking enforcement. So what we were looking at this year, which this represents 95% of the way we wanted to move it, was that there isn't a need we don't see that there's a need anymore to separate the garages as the 3 separate ones and that we can budget as a whole. Because we have run into issues where Cottrell has had to try to budget in terms of anticipating issues or maintenance that might come up, and he'll he'll underestimate for one garage but overestimate, which then ends up being an administrative nightmare in terms of getting transfers of funds. So we're just trying to make it that he has available to him the funds available easily to pay for these expenses, but still obviously budgeting for the garages as a whole. So that is definitely a change in here. It does look like the revenue associated with the garages are still separated individually, so we will have to look back at that as opposed to having them just under the general 0000 cost center, or even I had proposed a just new cost center that's just garages. Either way, it cuts out having to take one bill that might be associated with all 3 garages, and when it's entered into the requisition system, splitting it 3 ways so that a little chunk comes out of each garage.
And Cottrell, you can maintain statistics and stuff on the individual garages, but we can combine it in the budget, right, for convenience? Oh, sorry, Cottrell, you're going to have to come up.
Sorry.
And can you
Spell your name.
give your name and spell it, please?
Yeah, my name is Cottrell Barnes, Kittrell, Parking Bureau Manager for the City of York. With the new financial system we just put in place earlier this year, we can actually separate it so that way we can tie it based on the revenue code that we use. So when they input the revenue, it's tied to a certain code, which is then tied to a specific line item, and we can designate based on that revenue code to tell where it's supposed to go, i.e. we can tell if it goes to a garage, if it goes to a meter, whatever the case is. So yeah, we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
So that's where you go through, you'll see, where there might have been a budget last year, but they're not this year. The one thing that we do keep separate in terms of, and then all the staffing associated with the basic Cottrell and Mary as the parking bureau manager and assistant manager, and then we do have a finance specialist that's budgeted in here. The little bit of the administrative assistant, soon to be executive administrator, that's budgeted in HR comes into here, but then also all of the maintenance staff. As opposed to them being split between the garages, just all is going under the 0000 cost center. And then the only thing that's kept separately is parking enforcement. So parking enforcement does have its own cost center, and the staff associated with parking enforcement is budgeted separately in here. For the most part, it's salaries that's associated in here expense-wise. There's a little bit associated with printing and binding. And then there is a capital DP software line item that's associated with the handhelds that they use when they're printing tickets. So we do keep that separate, especially because there is essentially separate revenue coming in for that. So we can keep that separate. But when it comes down to it, there's not a lot of increases in his contract. He says the largest increase, and he could speak for himself because he's here, was in the other contractual services, I believe for 0000, which is they'd like to enter into agreement for camera monitoring within the garages. They have had an issue in upgrading the ones that they have in there. The monitoring is expected to help them better manage and prevent the vandalism in the garages and break-ins into people's vehicles. And ultimately, Cottrell believes this is an important deterrent with the current use of the garages and with the Yorktown reopening, because we are working in the process of an agreement with the Yorktown that since they no longer have a garage actually connected to the Yorktown, that they will be utilizing the Market Street garage across the street. So we need to make sure everyone in general is safe in there, and the 24/7 surveillance is an attempt to do that. Past that, there was a change in enforcement salaries. And it's minor. Essentially, they were structured with a handful of full-time parking enforcement officers and then a couple part-time. And what Cottrell expressed is, I didn't give him quite what he was hoping for, but I did take 2 part-time and make them a full-time, which I think is going to be useful in terms of them being able to cover school patrol and day and night street cleaning, and later evening shifts to address neighborhood parking issues. So there was a change there to help towards that. And again, something that I think I would suggest that we continue to evaluate as you get settled with the new one. Is there still a need? Because obviously, again, there's revenue associated besides, making parking comfortable for everybody and safe. There could be revenue associated with violations that could be increased because we've got more patrol.
So I'm seeing, if I'm in the right center here, 4 or 5 parking enforcement officers, right? So we're seeing a doubling of the salaries, and I see the reduction of 60,000 approximately in the part-time employees, which I guess is what you're talking about. But going from 160 to 332, that seems like we're doubling the force, the parking enforcement force.
Yeah.
What am I seeing here?
Don't know. Let me see here.
0045 salaries.
Yeah. Let me double check, because I have budgeted for
Maybe she did give you an extra.
6. No, I have a total of 6 full-time. Let me make sure I'm in the right year. Yeah, a total of 6 full-time and 2 part-time, because you had 4 part-time. That's what's included in there. And then what I can do is compare to what was budgeted for last year to see where the difference might be. I'm not sure, because I'm guessing that the difference might be associated with I think what it was last year was, last year I had budgeted 4 full-time and 4 part-time. And that included, we had 1 vacancy at the time. But I thought you always had 5, didn't you?
Not always.
Okay.
We just filled it.
Sorry. Sorry, I shouldn't stare at you and ask you to respond to me. I apologize.
No, we had 5, and then we had 1 leave this year, and then we kind of had that vacancy for about 9 months. We just filled it, and then there was the request to add either 1 or 2 more. So I think just from an actual perspective, it was just we weren't using
Yeah.
what was there. I don't know if that's the difference or not.
The other thing to keep in mind here is that the full-time parking enforcement officers are part of the Yippee union. So their contract for the Yippee union for this year was not finalized going into this budget. So not that it doubled their salaries by any means. There's an additional full-time in here, but there would be more of an increase between what was budgeted last year to this year, because you're almost seeing 2 years worth of contracted pay increases. But it looks like the big issue is that last year it was 4 full-time and 4 part-time that was budgeted, and then this year it's the 6 full-time and 2 part-time.
Well, it sounded like there were 5 budgeted,
Yeah, dude.
but they just didn't. So is the
didn't fill it, yeah.
FY22 amended, is this, what I'm looking at, taking into account the fact that we didn't expend those funds?
No, I'm literally, I pulled the workforce plan out of the approved 22 budget, and it says 4. So I'm not sure if, and I think it might have been, because I thought I had seen this, and I think what it was is that we're in the process of promoting a part-time person to a full-time position, and it ultimately, we didn't do that transition, and then I left the vacancy for the part-time. So we under budgeted for last year, but because of vacancies, we're not going to be over budget in terms of what's actually expended for 22. But when it comes to you comparing what was budgeted for 22 as to what was budgeted for 23, there's definitely a gap between them.
All right, can you give me an explanation on that?
Sure.
More of an explanation? Thank you.
And that there was some changes to the capital projects in Fund 50 that was associated with parking. Let's see here. Gets a little confusing when it's the different garages. But it's actually a reduction in what was budgeted last year. We did the automation of the garages this year, and that was a capital improvement. So that was part of this year's budget. That's not part of next year. They did budget specifically for parking enforcement. They're looking to equip one vehicle with LPR technology for enforcement to help identify abandoned vehicles. So that's one expense that they included in there. They're also looking to add the electric vehicle
I'm sorry.
chargers.
Can you repeat that? What was
Sure.
that? The parking enforcement?
Yes. And I know this has been something that, because even when parking enforcement several years ago was part of the police department, was the idea that parking enforcement is by law allowed to have access to that information from the state for the purpose of their roles in parking enforcement. So at this point, the request is to have one vehicle equipped that they can use for that purpose and even be assigned to abandoned vehicle lookup or whatever it would be. But the parking enforcement officer who would have access to that equipment would have to be held at the same standards as the police officers who use the equipment as well. So that is included in their capital budget, along with chargers for electric vehicles for the garages, and that they are looking for the future in terms of even going gateless in the garages now that we've automated, because we've had 6 gates damaged in the last year of people driving through them. So if they're not actually needed anymore, that'd be actually a savings to us in the long run to move in that. So we're just continuing looking at.
Sorry, Cottrell, I'm gonna have to have you come back up here again and explain that to me. How? Because you can't pay on the front. You can't pay on the front end. How are we gonna have gateless garages?
There's a couple different ways we can do it. One way would be to basically add the license plate recognition technology to the parking garages, but the other way that I've seen it done is kind of far less expensive, where you can actually use the mobile app that we have on street, and you would be able to remove the gates at the parking garages and then have enough signage within the parking garage for use of the mobile app. And then that would actually allow you to remove the gate. Now, there will be heavier enforcement when it comes to that, because now you have to have someone just kind of drive through on a periodic basis to make sure everyone's paid up. But the Park Mobile actually will connect to the current machines that we have, and it will allow people to flow freely in and out of the garage without having a gate.
Having a hard time picturing this, so because it sounds to me like you're going to require more enforcement, and it'll essentially make the parking garages like parking meters. If you're there over time, if you haven't paid your Park Mobile fee, then we're going to be ticketing you within the garages. Is that what you're saying?
In essence, yes. If it's
How
not
much?
paid,
That sounds
yeah.
like a lot of labor and a whole another thing. Let's talk about this.
Okay. Well,
'cause this
then
isn't-
the reason that came up is because we already have someone downtown, and it would be part of their patrol to make sure that everything would be paid up. And again, the impetus behind this is the number of gates. They're $1,000 a piece when they get broken, and it's something that is a cost issue, and it's very much an annoyance to have to continue to replace gates. So that's one thing that we're looking at in order to help resolve the issue. But yes, that was the request in essence.
I understand the annoyance. However, $1,000 a pop at 6 is only $6,000. Every time we buy new technology, or if we're going to need more individuals, or we're taking those individuals off their other routes so that they can be doing parking garage, that
I understand that
at
there's
first glance,
At-
it doesn't sound very efficient, but let's talk about it.
Will do.
And that's not a done deal in here, right?
No.
In the
No.
in the budget, right? Okay.
And the other thing associated with that is that the need for when the gate isn't working and that someone has to physically come in to let people out of the garage at certain periods of time. So that would eliminate the need for that as well. So just to take that into consideration. But no, I believe that was just under the potential of projects to start looking into for 2023, but isn't actually included in the budget. So the idea is that now that we're automated, they're continuing to look for ways to improve the customer's access to our garages and their experience, but also looking to minimize cost and make sure that we're still collecting what we need. So I believe that is, the one, no, I don't want to do that, sorry. I think that's all. There's a few increases for printing and binding and signage, but that's just like everyone else in terms of the cost of materials anymore.
Yeah, I saw those. I have
Yeah.
no questions on that. I don't think I have any further
That's been a
questions.
theme. Okay.
You have anything more?
No, I'm done.
All right. With that, I believe presentations are completed. I have no further questions of the budget team, so I will call for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Manuel Gomez, resident, City of York. I just want to make a few brief statements. Yesterday, you called out a few items that were of note. Particularly, I want to urge support for Director Watson's call for some additional funds for marketing. I do think that we should robustly back those marketing efforts at this point in time. You know, as well as I do, we have some crucial initiatives at play. And it's shocking to me on one end where we go all in on making sure that certain initiatives are well publicized, but sometimes we drop the ball. And not all stakeholders are aware of where they might be able to fit in or how they may be impacted. And I do support, if it's a one-time expense, although it's hitting the general fund, I would urge that it be supported. Of course, I support City Council's request for additional funding. That was brought up yesterday as well. I am very much behind that request, and I'm glad to see that you at least appear to be not in the way of it. That's wonderful. I had concerns there. Now to some not so positive feedback. Well, let me say this. Am I the only person that appreciated your, I don't know if you timed it, but it was 30 minutes, pretty much on the nose. Am I the only one who appreciated that? Because I did. I believe it was well presented. It's good to see the municipal budgeting process be presented almost like a storyline, a vision of what it is that you want to do, not just a bunch of line items. It helps us understand the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, and it was very well presented. I appreciated it as much. There were some topics of concern, and I'm not going to get too detailed here tonight. I think some of it is going to be most appropriate for when we have our meeting format. I was a bit concerned by the Director of Permits requesting what I believe to be body armor for some of the staff. I don't believe that we've ever funded even the mayor's office or yourself as the chief executive of the city. And you don't have to relay any specifics to your security, but I don't believe we've ever funded anybody in the mayor's office being equipped with body armor for any reason. Any other service providers in the city have been ever equipped with body armor with public funds that I'm aware of, other than, of course, law enforcement. And I almost want to call him the chief all the time, but police commissioner himself, if I've ever seen him, and he's running and he's sweaty down Queen Street, I don't think he's wearing so much as a flak jacket, anything. I don't see any other service providers, FedEx, letter carriers, engaging with our neighborhoods in that fashion. There's a perceptual concern, the optics of it, number one, especially as they're approaching doorsteps, residencies, where there may be language barriers. It doesn't sit well with me. I would urge you to reconsider your support if you were supportive. And again, some of this is better relayed to council at that point, but I'm not so apt to be supportive of that initiative. I can't see where anybody else or any other organization, I couldn't imagine if FedEx said, this area, and I don't know how they would couch this, we're going to charge you a surcharge so that we can equip our carriers with body armor before they serve your community. I believe that would be perceived as highly contemptuous. At least that's the way that I perceived it. It's just how I felt when it was relayed, and was a bit casual in the request. I just don't see it. I would imagine that these inspectors or maintenance staff would live amongst the community, and if they do they wear body armor as they transport their groceries in and out of their residences, as we travel back and forth in our communities? No, it just doesn't sit well with me. That's just a few of my concerns, but I am happy to see a lot of the efficiencies that are taking place, paying our MMOs on time. I'm not in the agreement of that interest fee being just something that we can say it's to our benefit. Well, it's good to see us paid on time, as well as all the other debt obligations that we've made good on. So a lot of positive things. We'll hear more as this comes before council. I do have some other topics I'd like to speak on, but that's what struck me the most, at least based on what I've heard from the presentations. And thank you to everybody. Looks like everybody's pulling in the right direction.
Thank you, Manuel. Anyone else for public comment? Hearing none, we'll conclude this meeting at 7:18, November 22nd. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and your hard work.
Thank you.